In 2002, Elon Musk was crying in a parking lot. His company had just been sold. He'd been pushed out of the CEO seat of the very company he founded. And instead of retiring on the $180 million payout like any reasonable person would, he did something insane. He put almost all of it into a rocket company, one that had never launched anything, one that most aerospace engineers said would fail within a year. 24 years later, that same man became the first person in human history to be worth over $1 trillion. This is not a story about luck. It's a story about someone who went bankrupt in spirit at least 3 separate times and used each collapse as fuel. By the end of this video, you'll understand the actual mechanics of how a $180 million payout becomes a $1 trillion empire, and why the same traits that built it nearly destroyed it more than once. Let's get into it. Elon Musk was born in 1971 in Pretoria, South Africa. Not a poor childhood. His father was an engineer, but not an easy one either. Musk has described being severely bullied at school, at one point hospitalized after a beating that left him unable to breathe through his nose properly for years. What he did instead of fighting back was read encyclopedias, science fiction. By his early teens, he'd apparently gone through entire sets of reference books, and at 12 years old, he taught himself to code and sold a simple game called Blaster to a computer magazine for about $500. That's the first data point that matters here. The earliest version of Musk's business model was already visible. Learn a technical skill nobody's forcing you to learn. Build something, sell it, repeat. At 17, he left South Africa, partly to avoid mandatory military service under apartheid, partly because he'd set his sights on the United States. He moved to Canada first, using his mother's Canadian citizenship, worked odd jobs, including a stint shoveling grain in a lumber mill, and eventually transferred to the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned degrees in economics and physics. Then came the moment that tells you everything about how he thinks. He got into a PhD program in applied physics at Stanford in 1995 and quit after 2 days. The internet was happening. He didn't want to study the future. He wanted to build it. That decision led to Zip2, a company Musk built with his brother Kimball, essentially an early online city guide and business directory, the kind of thing that would later become Yelp or Google Maps listings. Here's the part most retellings skip. Zip2 nearly died more than once. Early on, Musk was sleeping in the office and showering at a gym because there wasn't money for an apartment. He was also, by his own admission, a difficult founder to work under. Abrasive, impatient, convinced he understood the product and the code better than the people he'd hired. The board eventually pushed him out of the CEO role and brought in an experienced executive instead, keeping Musk as an advisor. In 1999, Compaq bought Zip2 for over $300 million in cash. Musk's share was roughly $22 million. Most people stopped there. Musk put nearly all of it into his next bet. That bet was X.com, an online banking startup with a genuinely radical idea for 1999. What if you could email money to anyone instantly? X.com eventually merged with a rival company called Confinity, whose product was called PayPal. The merged company kept fighting over its own identity, literally rebranding back and forth between X.com and PayPal, while Musk, again, clashed hard with the leadership team over technical direction, including his push to move the whole system onto Microsoft servers, which much of the engineering team hated. In 2000, while Musk was on his honeymoon, the board voted to remove him as CEO, 2 board outs in 2 companies. If the story ended in 2000, this would be a case study in brilliant but impossible to work with. Then eBay bought PayPal in 2002 for $1.5 billion in stock. Musk, still the largest shareholder, walked away with about $180 to $250 million depending on how you count it. That's the money from the opening scene. That's the parking lot money. Here's where the story stops looking like a normal tech founders and starts looking like something else. In 2002, instead of angel investing that money across 20 safe startups the way most newly rich tech founders do, Musk put roughly $100 million into a rocket company he founded from scratch, SpaceX. His stated reason at the time sounded almost absurd. He wanted to help make humanity a multi-planetary species, starting with sending a small greenhouse to Mars to reignite public interest in space exploration. The aerospace industry's reaction was, roughly, a random internet millionaire with no aerospace background is going to compete with Boeing and Lockheed Martin, Who build rockets for the US government? Sure. At almost exactly the same time, Musk invested about $70 million into a small electric car startup called Tesla Motors, founded by engineers Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning. He joined as chairman and primary funder, not yet CEO. So, by 2004, Musk had put nearly everything he had, the entire PayPal fortune, into two industries that venture capital considered nearly uninvestable: rockets and electric cars. Both capital-intensive, both with brutal physics, both with long, expensive paths to any revenue at all. Then 2008 happened. The financial crisis hit at the worst possible moment for both companies. SpaceX's first three rocket launches in 2006, 2007, and 2008 all failed. Tesla was burning cash trying to get its first car, the Roadster, into production, and production costs were spiraling. Musk was, by his own account, personally borrowing money from friends to cover rent. He has said he came close to running out of money entirely. In late 2008, SpaceX had enough money for one more launch attempt. If it failed, the company was done. On September 28, 2008, Falcon 1 reached orbit. It was the first privately developed liquid fuel rocket ever to do so. Weeks later, NASA awarded SpaceX a $1.6 billion contract to resupply the International Space Station. That contract is arguably the single most important commercial deal in the company's history. It gave SpaceX both cash and legitimacy at the exact moment it needed both to survive. Around the same time, in December 2008, Tesla closed its funding round literally hours before the company would have run out of money. Two near deaths in the same year for two different companies, both survived within weeks of each other. That's not a normal story. That's the kind of coincidence that, if you saw it in a movie script, you'd say was too convenient. In 2022, Musk did something that, even by his standards, stunned the business world. He offered $44 billion to buy Twitter, a company he'd been publicly criticizing, then spent months trying to back out of the deal, then was forced by a Delaware court to close it anyway. He renamed it X. He cut roughly 3/4 of the staff. Many advertisers pulled out over content moderation concerns, and the platform's ad revenue dropped sharply in the year after the acquisition. For a long stretch, most outside estimates valued X at a fraction of what Musk paid for it. But Musk didn't treat X as a standalone bet. He treated it as infrastructure. He folded X into a broader AI push, launching xAI, and eventually merged X and xAI's business operations, using the platform's data and user base to help train and distribute his AI chatbot, Grok. That merger let him tell a different story to investors. X wasn't a failed social network purchase anymore. It was the data and distribution layer for an AI company competing with OpenAI and Google. That reframing mattered enormously later, because when SpaceX eventually needed to be valued for a public listing, the X/xAI stake sitting inside the SpaceX corporate structure got counted as part of the pitch too. Which brings us to the number from the start of this video. On June 12, 2026, SpaceX went public on the NASDAQ under the ticker SPCX, the largest IPO in history, pricing at $135 a share and implying a valuation north of $1.7 trillion, which jumped past $2 trillion on its first day of trading. For 24 years, SpaceX had been a private company. Musk's stake in it existed only on paper, valued by whatever price the last private funding round said it was worth. The IPO turned that paper value into a real, tradable, market-priced number overnight. And that one event, combined with his Tesla stake, pushed Musk past $1 trillion in net worth, making him the first trillionaire in recorded history. But here's the part that actually matters if you're trying to learn something from this story, rather than just admire the headline. That number has been wildly unstable ever since. Within days of the IPO, his net worth swung by hundreds of billions of dollars as SpaceX shares whipsawed in early trading, surging, dropping, briefly costing him the trillionaire title entirely, then handing it back to him days later as shares rallied again. At one point, he'd fallen roughly $240 billion from his peak in the space of about a week. That's not a typo. That's ordinary volatility for a fortune, this concentrated in two barely seasoned, highly volatile stocks. That instability is the whole lesson of this chapter. When almost all of your wealth is unrealized stock in companies you control, you're not worth $1 trillion the way $1 trillion sits in a bank account. You're worth whatever the market decides you're worth at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Musk's fortune is one of the most extreme examples of paper wealth in history. Enormous, real in the sense that the shares exist, and completely at the mercy of sentiment, interest rates, and news cycles. So strip away the rockets and the trillion-dollar headlines. What's the actual financial pattern here? 1. Concentration, not diversification, built the fortune. Every financial advisor on earth will tell you to diversify. Musk did almost the opposite at every stage, dumping his entire PayPal payout into 2 companies, then refusing a salary in favor of all or nothing stock options. That's exactly why the swings are so violent in both directions. It's the same mechanism whether the number is going up $60 billion in a day or down $240 billion in a week. 2. Near collapse wasn't an obstacle to the story. It was a recurring stage of it. Getting removed as CEO twice in his 20s. 2 companies almost running out of cash in the same month in 2008. A $44 billion acquisition that looked like a historic overpay for 2 years. Every major leg up in the story was preceded by a point where, from the outside, it looked like a serious mistake. 3. The compensation structure is the real innovation. Most executives get paid whether the company does well or not. Musk's largest paydays have come from betting his own compensation entirely on hitting specific extreme performance targets, an approach that's legally messier, far riskier, and has occasionally blown up in court, but which also means his incentives and the company's stock price are about as aligned as they can possibly be. None of this makes concentrated all-in bets a good idea for most people. For almost everyone, that approach is how you lose everything, not how you build a trillion-dollar net worth. Musk's story is survivorship bias with excellent PR. For every founder who bet everything on one impossible-sounding company and won, there are thousands who made the same bet and simply disappeared. What's actually instructive isn't go all in. It's how he structured the upside once he did take the risk, and how much volatility he's had to personally tolerate to hold on to it. So, is Elon Musk a genius, a gambler, or just the luckiest person alive? Honestly, the answer is probably all 3 at different points in different amounts. But the part of this story that doesn't get repeated enough is how close it came to ending. Over and over. A parking lot in 2002, a single rocket launch in 2008, a boardroom vote while he was on his honeymoon. If you found this breakdown useful, the next video in this series covers the SpaceX IPO in detail, how a private rocket company gets valued at $2 trillion, and what it means for how founders take companies public going forward. Subscribe if you don't want to miss it, and let me know in the comments. Concentration or diversification? Which side are you on?